My name is Daniel, and I'm 27 years old now. But when I look back, there's a moment burned so deep into my memory that it shaped everything about who I became. I was 14, sitting in the back seat of my parents' beat-up sedan, with a half-empty soda in my lap and my backpack at my feet. We had been arguing, well, more like they were yelling. And I was just trying to keep my voice steady. About something so trivial I can't even remember it now. I think it started because I asked why my sister always got new clothes, while I had to wear her old hand-me-downs. Or maybe because I asked if I could join a sports team at school, even though we couldn't afford the fees. Whatever it was enough for my dad to sneer at me in the rearview mirror and say I was ungrateful. My mom chimed in, laughing. Look at him pouting. He'll never survive in the real world if he cries over this. Then the car slowed. I remember the gravel crunching under the tires as we pulled into a rest stop off the highway. My dad parked, turned around, and said, "Get out." At first, I thought he was joking. I laughed nervously and said, "What?" But he wasn't smiling. My mom reached back, grabbed my backpack, and shoved it against my chest. "If you think you deserve better, go figure it out on your own. We don't need a winner dragging this family down." My sister, Rachel, sitting smugly in the front seat, just looked back at me with this twisted grin, like she was watching her favorite TV show. I begged them not to leave me. I can still hear my voice cracking as I said, "Please don't." But my dad started the car again. And just before pulling out, my mom rolled down the window and called out, "Stop crying, Daniel. You'll thank us someday." Then they drove away. I stood there in the middle of that rest stop with my backpack, my heart racing so fast I thought I'd pass out. People walked by, some glanced at me, but no one asked if I was okay. I tried to convince myself they'd come back, that this was some horrible lesson or prank. But the minutes stretched into hours, and eventually, I knew they weren't coming back. That night, I slept on a bench with my jacket pulled tight, crying quietly because I didn't want anyone to hear. That was the day my childhood ended. It wasn't easy. I bounced around shelters, couches, odd jobs. I worked at a gas station at 15, scrubbing floors and stocking shelves, just so I could buy food. I learned to hide the fact that I didn't have anyone to go home to. School became a battle, not because I wasn't smart, but because I was so tired from working nights that I'd fall asleep in class. Teachers looked at me like I was a lost cause. My parents never checked in, not once. It was like I had ceased to exist to them. The only time I ever heard my mom's voice again back then was in my head, mocking me. "You'll never survive in the real world." That voice pushed me harder than anything else. By the time I was 17, I had saved enough from small jobs and a scholarship to get into college. I thought maybe I'd finally put them behind me. But every time I saw other students' families hugging them on move-in day, I felt this hollow ache in my chest. I told myself that one day I'd build something that no one could take away from me. Something so solid, so untouchable, that I'd never again feel like that kid abandoned at a rest stop. Fast forward to now. I'm 27, and I've done what I swore I would. I built my own company from scratch. Late nights, failed attempts, trial after trial. But I made it. By 25, I was a millionaire. It still feels strange to say out loud, but it's true. I have a house that feels like home, not just a roof. I have friends who became my real family. I have stability. For the first time, I feel like I belong somewhere. I've never looked back until last week. I opened my mailbox, and inside was an envelope with handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade. My sister's, Emily. The return address was my parents' house. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation with her name printed in gold script. But what made my hands shake wasn't the invite itself. It was the note scribbled at the bottom, written in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. It said, "Daniel, we need your help. Please come." I must have read those words a dozen times, trying to make sense of them. My parents, who left me at 14, who laughed at my tears, who never once reached out in all these years, now suddenly need me. My chest tightened with a mix of anger and disbelief. My first instinct was to throw the card away, but I couldn't. I sat there at my kitchen counter, staring at it for hours. Why now? Why after everything? And why would they think I'd just show up like nothing happened? That night, I lay awake, replaying the moment at the rest stop. My mother's mocking voice, my father's cold eyes, my sister's smirk. But then I thought of the note again. "We need your help." What could they possibly mean by that? Financial help? Approval? Some kind of image thing? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just an invitation. It was bait. And for the first time in years, I felt the old wound they gave me throb again. Like it had never healed. I didn't know yet whether I'd go. But one thing was certain. If I did, I wouldn't be walking into that wedding as the boy they abandoned. I'd be walking in as the man they never thought I could become. And that's where everything started to shift. I didn't reply right away. The invitation sat on my desk for days, staring at me every time I walked past. I tried to bury myself in work, in the daily routine that usually keeps my head clear. But I couldn't shake it. We need your help. Those 4 words echoed in my brain like a song on repeat. Eventually, I couldn't take the not knowing anymore. I typed out a short email to my sister, Sarah, using the address on the invite. Just one line. "What do you mean you need my help?" She replied within an hour. I hadn't expected such a fast response. Her message was bubbly, full of exclamation points. Like we were old friends catching up instead of estranged siblings. "Daniel, it's been so long. I'm so glad you got the invite. I really want you at the wedding. Mom and Dad said you're doing really well for yourself. Congratulations. We've been talking about you a lot lately. The truth is, the wedding's a bit bigger than we planned, and things are really tight right now. We could use your support. You know, family helping family." Smiley face. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. There it was. Not an apology, not even a question about how I'd been surviving all those years. Just a cheerful assumption that I'd open my wallet because it was family. I didn't respond right away. My hands hovered over the keyboard, shaking slightly. I closed the laptop instead and just sat in the silence of my apartment. The next evening, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. When I listened, I froze. It was my mother, Linda's, voice. "Daniel, honey, it's Mom. We're so glad you're coming to your sister's wedding. She's so excited. It would mean the world to us if you could pitch in a little. The catering is very expensive, and you've been so blessed. Don't you think it's time to give back to your family? Call us back soon." That phrase, "give back to your family," hit me like a slap. My family. The same family that abandoned me at 14. The same parents who mocked me as I cried. They wanted me to give back. I felt something burning in my chest. Equal parts fury and disbelief. The next day, I decided to test the waters. I sent my sister, Jessica, another message. "Why me? Don't you have Mom and Dad?" Her reply came fast again, like she'd been waiting. "Well, things are kind of complicated. Dad hasn't been working for a while, and Mom's hours got cut. You know how the economy is, and honestly, they already do so much for me. They can't be expected to cover everything. You're in the best position to help. Besides, you'll want this wedding to be perfect, won't you? After all, it's your sister's big day." That line almost made me laugh out loud. They hadn't cared about my big days. Not birthdays, not graduation. My family didn't even bother to show up when I was awarded a scholarship. But suddenly, I was supposed to care about hers. I didn't respond, but over the next few days, the pressure ramped up. My mom, Susan, left more voicemails, each one dripping with guilt-tripping tones. "Daniel, think of what people will say if you don't contribute. Your sister deserves a beautiful wedding. Daniel, we raised you. We gave you everything. And now it's your turn to show gratitude." That last one nearly made me drop my phone. They gave me everything. They left me at a rest stop with a backpack and a soda. That was everything. What made it worse was the way they talked about me. As though my success was theirs to take credit for. My mom slipped in phrases like, "We always knew you'd make it." Or, "Your father's tough love clearly worked." Tough love? Abandoning your 14-year-old isn't tough love. It's cruelty. But they had rewritten the past in their heads, turning my survival into proof of their wisdom. One afternoon, I got a call from my dad, Robert. His voice was gruff like always, but there was a thin edge of desperation. "Listen, Daniel, we don't ask for much. But your sister's wedding is important for the family's image. A lot of people will be there. People who matter. It wouldn't look good if we couldn't pull this off, right? You understand, right? Don't embarrass us." That word, embarrass, stabbed me harder than the rest. Growing up, that was his favorite insult. Anytime I spoke up, anytime I wanted something. Anytime I didn't fall in line, I was an embarrassment. Now, even with all I'd achieved, he still wielded that word like a weapon. It was becoming clear. They didn't want me there because they missed me. They didn't even want me there because I was family. They wanted me there because I had money. Because I could fund the image they wanted to project. Because in their minds, I was no longer the boy they discarded. I was a wallet with legs. But as much as their words infuriated me, something else stirred deep down. A part of me that still wanted to see their faces. When they realized who I had become. A part of me that wanted them to choke on the irony of begging for help. From the son they abandoned. And that part of me was growing louder each day. When I finally got another message from my sister, Michelle. This one more blunt than all the others. It sealed something inside me. "Daniel, stop being difficult. You're rich now. Helping out is nothing to you. Don't ruin my wedding because of some silly grudge. Some silly grudge. My hands trembled as I read it. 14-year-old me was still there, sitting on that bench, waiting for parents who would never return. And now, 13 years later, they were calling that pain a lifetime of scars, some silly grudge. I knew then that if I went to that wedding, it wouldn't be to celebrate. It would be to finally face them. To show them that I wasn't the boy they left behind. And with that realization, I picked up the invitation again. The date was circled in red ink, just 2 weeks away. That's when the real tension began. 2 weeks sounded like a long time at first. But the days started moving faster once my family realized I hadn't caved yet. Their messages shifted from polite guilt-tripping to thinly veiled threats. As though they were testing how far they could push. My sister, Emily, sent me pictures of her dress fittings, the banquet hall, even the menu. Each captioned with things like, "All this could fall apart without you, Daniel." Or, "Wouldn't it be awful if everyone found out you wouldn't step up for your only sister?" Then came the moment that flipped everything. It was late on a Thursday evening when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line read, "We already took care of it. You'll thank us later." The sender was my mother, Linda. My gut clenched. I opened it, and there it was in plain text. "We went ahead and spoke to your bank. Since we're your parents, they understood. We told them you'd cover $25,000 for the wedding. And they agreed to process it as an advance. The funds should be cleared by Monday. Don't worry, you can make more money easily. What matters is family sticking together." My vision blurred as I read it again and again. My chest tightened so much I thought I might actually faint. They hadn't asked. They hadn't even given me a chance to respond. They had gone behind my back and tried to take from me the boy they left at a rest stop with nothing. And now, because I had built everything on my own, they thought they could reach into my pockets without permission. I immediately called my bank, my hands shaking. After a tense 20 minutes with a representative, I confirmed what had happened. My parents had called, pretending to be me, trying to authorize a transfer. Thankfully, the bank flagged it because the caller couldn't answer basic security questions. Nothing had gone through yet. But the attempt was logged, and it was clear as day who had made it. I sat in silence after that call, staring at my apartment walls. My parents weren't just manipulative or entitled. They were willing to commit fraud. Willing to steal from their own son without hesitation. That night, my sister, Rachel, messaged me again. "Mom said everything is set. Don't worry about the money. Just show up at the wedding and bring a smile." Smiley face. Bring a smile. I couldn't help but laugh, though it came out more like a bitter choke. They had betrayed me before I even stepped foot in their lives again. I had been foolish enough to think their cruelty was a thing of the past. That maybe desperation had made them softer. But no, it was the same cycle. Only now their claws were reaching for my success instead of my tears. Something inside me shifted permanently in that moment. Any lingering fantasy that they might apologize, might try to make amends, died. They had just proven that I wasn't family to them. I was a resource, a credit line, a last resort piggy bank. I didn't reply to my sister's message. I didn't pick up when my mother, Susan, called the next day. But I started making quiet moves behind the scenes. Phone calls, arrangements, information gathering. If they wanted me at that wedding so badly, then I would go. But not as the obedient son they expected. I would go as someone they could never control again. And deep down, I started to plan something I hadn't allowed myself to think about in years. A way to make them feel the same cold abandonment they had once forced on me. The wedding date was circled in red. 13 days left. The days that followed felt heavier than I expected. For years, I had convinced myself that I was fine without them. That their absence was a wound I'd stitched up and left behind. But after the bank incident, after reading their smug messages, it was like the stitches had ripped open, and the pain came flooding back. I couldn't sleep. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of my father's voice calling me an embarrassment. My mother's laughter as she mocked me for crying. My sister's smirk burned into my memory. I thought I had buried those moments deep. But now they played on a loop. At 27, I felt like I was 14 again, sitting at that rest stop bench. With my backpack clutched to my chest, waiting for people who would never return. The worst part was the doubt. I hated that I even considered their requests for a split second. A part of me kept whispering, maybe if you help them now, they'll finally see your worth. Maybe this is your chance to fix it. That part disgusted me because I knew better. I knew who they were. Yet still, some stubborn, broken corner of my heart wanted them to choose me. Not for money, not for status, but as their son. Work became harder, too. Normally, running my company was my safe haven, a place where I was in control. But I found myself distracted, missing calls. staring at spreadsheets without absorbing a word. My assistant even asked if I was okay, and I had to force a smile and say I was just tired. The truth was, I wasn't tired. I was unraveling. 3 nights after the email, I took a drive. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get out. I ended up parking outside a rest stop. Not the same one, but close enough. I sat there for hours, headlights off, remembering that night. The silence, the fear, the moment I realized no one was coming back. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. And I whispered to myself, never again. That whisper became a promise. Slowly, the fog in my mind began to clear. If my parents and sister saw me as nothing more than a bank account, then I needed to stop approaching this situation like family. I had to see it for what it was, a transaction they were trying to force. And if they wanted to play that game, I could play it better. But I also knew I couldn't walk into this fueled only by anger. Anger makes you sloppy. I needed to be precise, controlled, unshakable. The boy they abandoned might have begged, but the man I had become would not. So I began to plan quietly, carefully. I pulled out the wedding invitation again and studied it. Not as a guest, but as if it were a blueprint. The venue, the date, the guest list hints scribbled in the margins. Every detail was a piece of leverage waiting to be uncovered. I started making calls to contacts I trusted. Event planners, caterers, even a lawyer friend who owed me a favor. Not to sabotage yet, but to gather knowledge. Information was power, and I intended to have plenty before I stepped foot into that hall. But beneath the planning, I still felt the weight of it all pressing down. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the kid they had abandoned staring back at me, asking if I was strong enough this time. And every time, I had to answer, yes, I am. I wasn't fully there yet, though. This was the lowest point I'd been in for years. Old wounds reopened, trust shattered again, my peace of mind broken. But from that rock bottom, a different kind of strength was beginning to form. Not the kind that pretends the past doesn't hurt, but the kind that knows exactly how much it does and decides to act anyway. And with each passing day, the circle around that wedding date on my calendar seemed to burn brighter. Like a countdown I couldn't escape. Something shifted the morning after my late-night drive to the rest stop. I woke up groggy, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I looked at myself in the mirror, and instead of seeing the boy who was left behind, I saw the man who had clawed his way back. I remembered all the nights I worked 2 jobs while studying. All the risks I took building my company. All the deals that everyone told me would fail, but didn't. That kid had survived on nothing but grit. And this man had built everything from it. If I could do that, then I could handle whatever came next. I poured my energy into work again. Instead of letting their voices haunt me, I drowned them out with productivity. The company I had built was already thriving. But now, with my focus back, things accelerated. In the span of a week, I closed 2 major contracts I'd been chasing for months. One of them doubled our quarterly projections. My employees, my chosen family, celebrated with me, raising glasses and toasting my leadership. They didn't know the storm I was fighting behind the scenes. But in their cheers, I found strength. These were people who wanted me around, not for my money, but for who I was. My bank account swelled further, but more importantly, my confidence did. The betrayal still hurt, yes, but it was starting to turn into fuel. Every voicemail my mother, Helen, left. Every manipulative text from my sister, Jessica. Every memory of my father, Thomas, calling me an embarrassment. It all fed the fire inside me. A fire that didn't burn me down this time, but made me sharper. I started preparing with intention. I called my lawyer friend again, not just to ask about the bank fraud attempt, but to explore my options. We talked through scenarios, protections, and ways to make sure my family could never pull something like that again. Hearing him say, "You're completely in control here, Daniel. They don't have a leg to stand on," was like breathing fresh air after years of suffocating. I also reached out to the event planner handling my sister's wedding. It wasn't difficult. Money opens doors, and connections open the rest. Within a day, I had a detailed outline of what they had planned. The costs, the vendors, the contracts. I learned how far over budget my parents and sister had gone, stretching themselves thin with the expectation that I'd swoop in to save them. Without my contribution, they were teetering on collapse. That knowledge was powerful. It meant I didn't have to storm into their world angrily. I could walk in calmly, knowing that their house of cards rested entirely on me, and that I could flick it over with one finger. Meanwhile, I began to take care of myself in ways I had neglected. I hit the gym again, not just for fitness, but to release the stress. The weights felt good in my hands, grounding me, reminding me of how far I had come physically and mentally. I ate better, slept better, surrounded myself with people who valued me. Bit by bit, the boy who had been shaken was replaced by the man who was rising. Every day, the date circled on my calendar seemed less like a looming threat, and more like an opportunity. An opportunity not just for revenge, but for closure. For years, my family had controlled the narrative in my head. They were the ones who left me, the ones who defined me as weak, as unworthy. But standing in my office one afternoon, looking out over the city skyline, I realized something profound. The story didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to me. When I thought about walking into that wedding, I no longer felt fear or even anger. I felt anticipation. They had spent years believing I was gone, irrelevant. Or at best, a tool to exploit. But soon they would see the truth. Not in words, not in arguments, but in presence. In the undeniable reality that I had built a life far beyond anything they imagined for me. And so, while my parents and sister scrambled behind the scenes, counting on me to save their perfect image, I was quietly stacking my cards, aligning my power, and preparing to walk into their carefully constructed world. As the one person who could undo it all. The countdown was shrinking. 10 days left until the wedding, and for the first time, I was ready. Truly ready to face them. By the time the wedding was a week away, I had gathered more information than my family would ever guess. What started as curiosity, wanting to see how badly they had overextended themselves, turned into a gold mine of leverage. Through my contacts, I learned that the wedding venue hadn't been fully paid off. My parents had only put down a deposit, promising the balance would come soon. The caterer was already chasing them for overdue invoices. The florist had threatened to cancel if the bill wasn't settled. And here was the kicker. The photographer, who had been booked months ago, told me outright that my sister, Sarah, had bragged. "Don't worry, my brother's loaded. He'll cover everything." They had built their entire event on a lie. That I, the son they abandoned, would step in as their savior. Without me, the whole thing was held together with string and hope. That knowledge filled me with a quiet, cold calm. They thought they had backed me into a corner. In reality, they had built themselves into one, brick by brick. All I had to do was show up and decide whether to knock the final stone loose. But that wasn't all. A friend of mine worked in local media, and over coffee one morning, she casually mentioned that the wedding was already creating some buzz in town. "Your sister's been telling everyone it's going to be the event of the season," she said with a smirk. "Sounds like your parents are pulling every string to make themselves look like royalty." That was when it clicked. This wasn't just about money. It was about image. My parents didn't just want me to pay for the wedding. They wanted me to stand there, visible proof of their successful family. The son they had raised so well. The millionaire who would smile for the cameras and give them credit for his achievements. They weren't inviting me back into their lives. They were hiring me as a prop. I spent the next few days laying the groundwork. I had my lawyer prepare documents protecting all of my accounts and assets. Just in case they tried another stunt like the bank call. I arranged a private conversation with the wedding venue manager, slipping him enough incentive to keep me informed of any behind-the-scenes changes. I even spoke to a few vendors myself, posing as someone assisting with coordination, just to hear how much was riding on me. The desperation in their voices told me everything. Without me, the wedding couldn't happen the way my family had promised. Meanwhile, my mother, Linda's, voicemails grew more frantic. "Daniel, we can't do this without you. Your sister is counting on you. Do you want to ruin her big day?" My father, Robert's, tone was harsher. "If you don't step up, don't bother showing your face. You'll embarrass us in front of everyone." My sister, Emily, of course, sent messages dripping with entitlement. "Just bring your checkbook, Daniel. That's literally all you have to do. You'll even get to sit at the front table. Win-win." Each word only strengthened my resolve. They truly had no idea who I had become. No idea that every manipulation only made me sharper. The turning point came 3 days before the wedding. My lawyer called me with something unexpected. "Daniel," he said, "I think you should know. Your parents tried to list you as a guarantor on a personal loan they took out last month. It was denied, but they tried. They used your name and inflated your relationship with them." I felt my stomach knot. It was one thing to pressure me, to guilt me, even to attempt fraud through the bank. But trying to legally tie me to their debts. That was beyond anything I'd imagined. It meant they weren't just looking to use me once. They were trying to chain me to their failures long term. That was when the last piece of my plan fell into place. This wedding wasn't just their vanity project. It was their lifeline. And they had gambled everything on the son they thought was still too weak. Too desperate for approval to say no. They were wrong. I didn't tell them I knew. I didn't respond to their messages. I let them keep believing I would show up. Checkbook in hand, smiling for the crowd. But inside, the storm had gone quiet. I had leverage, knowledge, resources, and most importantly, control. The boy at the rest stop was gone. The man walking into that wedding was someone entirely different. And my family had no idea what was coming. The morning of the wedding, I woke earlier than usual. I wasn't nervous. In fact, I felt a strange calmness, like everything had already been decided. For years, I had pictured what it would be like to see them again. Would I shake? Would I yell? Would I crumble? But as I buttoned my tailored suit and adjusted the watch on my wrist, I realized the answer was none of those. I wasn't going to confront them as the abandoned kid they left behind. I was going to walk in as the man they never expected me to become. The venue was lavish, far too lavish for my parents' modest means. A sprawling banquet hall, chandeliers glittering from the ceiling. White roses lining every aisle. I knew, thanks to my behind-the-scenes research, that nearly everything was still unpaid for. To the guests, though, it looked flawless. And that was the illusion my family was desperate to maintain. I arrived deliberately late, just as people were finding their seats. Heads turned as I walked through the doors. Some guests whispered my name. People I hadn't seen in years. Distant relatives who had bought into my parents' narrative that I was the lost cause. Their eyes widened when they saw me step in confidently, dressed sharply. A far cry from the boy they remembered. My mother, Susan, spotted me first. She rushed over with a dramatic smile plastered across her face. As though we had been close all along. "Daniel," she exclaimed, her voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You made it. I knew you wouldn't let us down." She reached for my arm, but I didn't return the gesture. I simply gave her a polite nod, keeping my face unreadable. My father, Thomas, joined in, his smile more forced. "Good to see you, son," he said through clenched teeth. "We were worried you'd embarrass us." Embarrass them. Even now, with everything they had done, that was the word he chose. My sister, Rachel, appeared last, dressed in her gown, radiant for the crowd. But sharp in her tone when she leaned in close. "You did bring something for us, right?" she whispered. Her eyes darting to my suit pocket as though expecting a check to appear on command. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I didn't answer. Instead, I let the silence hang, watching her fidget. Then I excused myself and took my seat near the front, where they had clearly reserved a spot for me as part of their display. The ceremony went smoothly, but I wasn't focused on vows or music. I was watching my parents, noticing how often they glanced at me. How tense their smiles became. They were waiting for me to announce my contribution. To prove to the world that their successful son was funding this grand show. They had written me into their performance without my consent. And I was about to rewrite the script entirely. When the reception began, I made my move. The MC announced that the bride's parents would say a few words. My father, Robert, chest puffed, took the microphone. And began his usual performance. Talking about how proud he was of his daughter. How much the family had sacrificed, how strong their bonds were. He was laying it on thick, clearly preparing to pivot toward me. And then he did. "We're also so blessed to have our son Daniel here with us today," he said, gesturing in my direction. "He's done incredibly well in life, thanks to the values we instilled in him. And we're so grateful for his generosity in making this day possible." There it was, the lie. The room erupted in polite applause, eyes turning to me. I could feel the pressure like a wave, but instead of drowning, I stood. Calmly, deliberately, I walked to the microphone. My father's confident grin faltered as I took it from his hands. I paused, scanning the room, letting the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to lean in. Then, in a steady voice, I said, "I'm honored to be here today. It's true, I've worked hard and been fortunate in life. But just to be clear, I didn't pay for this wedding. In fact, I only learned recently that there were assumptions made about me that weren't true." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I caught sight of the venue manager standing near the back, arms crossed, already suspicious. The caterer, too, his face tightening as he listened. I continued, still calm. "I want to wish my sister well, but I also want everyone here to understand something. When I was 14, my parents left me at a rest stop on the side of the road. They told me to figure out life on my own. I did. Everything I have, I built without them. So, if you see me today, don't see their success. See mine." Gasps filled the room. My mother's face went pale, her smile collapsing. My father's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. My sister, Emily, stared at me, frozen, her lips parted in shock. And then I handed the microphone back to the MC. Gave a polite nod to the crowd, and returned to my seat. As though nothing had happened. The effect was immediate. Guests whispered furiously, some casting sharp looks at my parents. Others whispering with raised eyebrows. The venue manager slipped out of the hall, no doubt to check on payments. The caterer was already pulling out his phone. The illusion was cracking, right there in real time. And all I had done was tell the truth. My parents tried to recover. My mother, Linda, laughed nervously, stammering about misunderstandings. While my father, Thomas, barked at the MC to move things along. But the damage was done. The room no longer saw them as the dignified hosts of a perfect event. They saw them as liars, exposed in front of everyone who mattered. And I sat there, calmly sipping my drink, knowing that for the first time in my life, they were the ones scrambling while I was in control. The fallout was instant, but it wasn't loud. It was the kind of quiet that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. Guests leaned into one another, whispering, shaking their heads. A cousin of mine I hadn't spoken to in years caught my eye from across the room, and mouthed the words, "Rest stop?" I gave him the smallest nod. His face darkened. Word was already spreading like fire in dry grass. My mother, Susan, tried to laugh it off, but her voice trembled, betraying her. "Daniel has a flair for dramatics," she stammered. "You know how kids exaggerate things." But her words only dug the hole deeper. I saw the way people looked at her now, not amused, but disgusted. My father, Robert, stepped in, his tone sharp, desperate. "Enough of this. We won't let one bitter story ruin this day. Let's move on." But no one moved on. The damage was irreversible. The venue manager returned, this time with a clipboard in hand. He leaned down to whisper something into my father's ear. And I watched my father's face flush an angry red. The unpaid balance, tens of thousands, was due immediately, or services would be cut off. The caterer wasn't far behind. Phone in hand, already warning that food service would stop if payment wasn't made. The band exchanged uneasy looks. Guests started realizing the grand illusion had been built on empty promises. My sister, Rachel, pale as her dress, stormed over to me. "You ruined everything," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Why couldn't you just play along?" I set my drink down, looked her in the eye, and said calmly, "Because the truth doesn't disappear just because you don't like it." She opened her mouth to spit something back, but before she could, the lights above flickered. A staff member whispered something to the DJ, and suddenly the music cut out. Whispers turned into gasps. The venue manager announced loudly enough for the room to hear. "Until payment is made in full, our services are suspended." The wedding, the event they had staked their pride on, was collapsing in front of everyone. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some slipping out the doors. Plates of half-prepared food were wheeled back into the kitchen. The room, once buzzing with laughter and celebration, now felt suffocating with tension and shame. My parents rushed around frantically, pulling at relatives' sleeves, begging for loans to cover the bills. But no one reached for their wallets. Why would they? Everyone had just heard the truth. No one wanted to bankroll people who abandoned their own son. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked toward the exit. My sister, Emily, grabbed my arm one last time, her voice desperate now, cracking. "Daniel, please don't leave me like this. Don't abandon me." Her words hit me like ice. Don't abandon me. The same phrase that had run through my head all those years ago, when I begged my parents not to drive away. The irony was almost too sharp to bear. I gently pulled my arm free and looked at her with a calmness I had earned over 13 long years. "I know exactly how that feels," I said softly. Then I turned and walked out. As I stepped into the evening air, the muffled chaos behind me fading, I felt something lift. For the first time since that night at the rest stop, I wasn't carrying their weight anymore. I wasn't waiting for their approval, their love, or their apology. I had faced them, stripped away their illusions, and left them to sit in the ruins they had built. The boy they abandoned had finally gotten his closure.